Weak, stupid woman. That was the sneer hurled by President Donald Trump, broadcasted live to more than 30 million Americans watching across the country. But Jasmine Crockett did not flinch. She stood in that chamber where, for over 200 years, voices like hers were silenced, mocked, or erased. In just 9 seconds, her words would flip the room, leaving the most powerful man in America cornered, exposed, and trembling. This wasn't just another shouting match in Congress. It was the collision of arrogance and truth, of raw power against unshakable courage. And what unfolded that day would ignite headlines, split households, and force a nation to ask, who really holds the future of America? The chamber of Congress roared like a restless storm. Cameras blinked red from every corner, their lenses fixed on the battlefield that was no longer policy, but pride, justice, and survival. The air was heavy with murmurs, journalists tapping their phones, aides whispering frantic predictions, lawmakers craning their necks to glimpse what they all knew was about to explode. Then the doors swung open. Donald J. Trump, 47th President of the United States, strode into the chamber with the swagger of a prizefighter returning to the ring. His right hand lifted high, fingers curled in the triumphant wave he had practiced for decades. The wave of a man who believed that applause was his birthright. His grin stretched wide, confident, smug, the grin of a man convinced that every spotlight in America was his personal crown. For a moment, the room felt subdued, as if even his enemies couldn't deny the force of his entrance. But then, like a lightning strike, Jasmine Crockett rose. She didn't rise slowly, cautiously, or timidly. She stood with the crack of a whip, her chair clattering back against the wooden panel. Every eye in the chamber shifted from the towering figure of Trump to the woman now standing firm, her voice cutting through the noise before he had even reached his seat. "Sit down," she said, her finger aimed straight at him, steady, unshaking. "But know this, you will answer to justice." The words fell like thunderbolts. The murmurs collapsed into silence. Reporters froze mid-sentence. Phones stilled in sweaty palms. Even Trump paused, his smile twitching, his stride faltering, just for a flicker of a second, before his face hardened into a mask of disdain. The chamber gasped as though struck by an invisible shockwave. Never, not in living memory, had a sitting member of Congress challenged a president so directly, so mercilessly in the opening seconds of his arrival. The insult from earlier, weak, stupid woman, still hung in the minds of millions watching live. But here she was, anything but weak, anything but stupid. She was fire. She was thunder. She was the storm breaking over Washington. Trump's lips curled into a smirk, his eyes narrowing with predatory malice. He leaned on the desk before him, his voice dripping with contempt. "Justice?" he scoffed. "Don't lecture me about justice." The words echoed, bouncing off the chamber's marble walls. But this time, his voice didn't dominate. It lingered in the air like smoke, fragile, fading, while Jasmine's presence burned brighter. She didn't flinch. She didn't blink. Her gaze pierced him, the way steel cuts through cloth. And in that charged silence, America leaned closer to their screens. Neighbors in living rooms whispered. Bars turned down their televisions to listen. Nursing homes and churches and crowded diners all fell into the same hushed trance. Because they knew, they felt, that this was not just politics. This was a reckoning. Trump tried to step forward, to reclaim the rhythm, but the thunder of Crockett's defiance had shifted the ground beneath him. His shoes clacked on the marble floor, too loud, too sharp, like a man walking into a trap of his own making. He lowered himself into the seat reserved for the president, but his movements felt different now, not like a king taking his throne, but like a fighter who sensed the tide turning against him. And Jasmine? She remained standing, head held high, shoulders squared. Her voice rang out again, slower this time, sharper, every syllable deliberate. "You can pretend to lead this nation, but you will never outrun the truth." Gas rippled through the chamber like a wave tearing across a shore. Aides covered their mouths. Senators exchanged startled glances. Cameras zoomed tighter, desperate to capture the tremor on Trump's face. For the first time that day, Donald Trump looked less like the untouchable president and more like a man who had just been called out in front of the entire world. And Jasmine Crockett, this so-called weak, stupid woman, looked like the storm that would not be silenced. The silence shattered as reporters scrambled to tweet, their fingers racing to immortalize every word. On social media, hashtags lit up within seconds. Justice confronts power. Russia word Crockett vs. Trump. Russia thunder in Congress. But inside the chamber, the battle lines were already drawn. The opening salvo had been fired. Jasmine's challenge was not just a statement, it was a declaration of war. And Trump, smirking, seething, his jaw tight, was not a man who forgave humiliation. The storm had begun. What no one yet knew was that before the day ended, secrets buried for decades would come crashing into the open. And the question no longer was whether Jasmine could withstand Trump's fury. The question was whether Trump could withstand Jasmine's truth. For a heartbeat, the chamber held its breath. Then Trump broke the silence with a laugh. Loud, mocking, jagged like broken glass. He leaned back in his chair, his chest rising and falling with the arrogance of a man who had stared down scandal after scandal and always walked away untouched. A second-rate congresswoman dares to lecture the President of the United States? His words slithered through the air, sharp and venomous. The insult landed like a slap, his voice amplified by the marble walls, carrying not only through the chamber, but across every television screen in America. Some lawmakers chuckled nervously, unsure whether to laugh along or recoil. Others shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting toward Jasmine, waiting, hoping to see if she would retreat. But Jasmine Crockett did not move back an inch. Her chin lifted, her eyes locked onto Trump's like a blade pressing against steel. And then, with a calmness that carried more weight than a scream ever could, she answered, "A liar does not deserve to lead America." Her words were soft in volume, but heavy as stone. They didn't need to be loud, because they carried the one thing Trump feared most: truth. The chamber erupted. Reporters gasped, pens scratching furiously across notepads. Cameras zoomed closer, their operators sensing the moment history was cracking open before their very lenses. Trump's smirk faltered for the briefest flicker of a second, but then he threw his head back and laughed again. Too loud this time, forced, brittle. "Liar," he barked. "You think you can brand me a liar in front of my people? Look at them!" He swept his arm across the chamber, gesturing at his allies sitting stiff in their seats, at the cameras transmitting his every word to millions across the nation. "Without me, this country would be chaos. Without me, you wouldn't even be standing here. You should be thanking me, not challenging me." The bravado rang hollow, though the force of his voice still pressed against the room like a wave. But Jasmine stood rooted, unflinching. Her reply cut through the noise like a scalpel through flesh. "I don't stand here because of you. I stand here in spite of you." Gas rolled through the chamber. The insult had turned into a duel, and Jasmine's blade had drawn first blood. Trump's hands clenched the armrests of his chair. His knuckles whitened, his jaw tightening with barely contained rage. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing into slits. "You're nothing," he hissed. "A background character in a play you'll never control." Jasmine tilted her head slightly, almost pitying, and said evenly, "And yet here you are, rattled by a woman you call nothing." The chamber exploded with murmurs, gasps, whispers. Journalists tripped over themselves, tweeting, typing, recording every syllable. Across America, living rooms echoed with startled laughter, disbelief, and cheers. Old veterans shook their heads in amazement. Retired teachers leaned closer to their screens. Families argued at their dinner tables, because what was unfolding wasn't politics as usual. It was personal, it was raw, it was history. The air thickened, heavy enough to choke. Trump pounded the desk in front of him with his palm, the crack echoing like a gunshot. "You think the American people want to hear you?" he thundered. "They want strength. They want victory. They want Trump." But Jasmine struck back with the precision of a spear. "They want honesty. They want dignity. And they are tired of your lies." The chamber tilted. Even his allies shifted uneasily, as though the force of her words had reached places his bluster could not shield. Trump tried to laugh again, but the sound came out strangled, hollow. His mask was slipping, piece by piece, and Jasmine pressed forward, her voice firm, unwavering, every syllable anchored in conviction. You call me second rate, but remember this. Every empire falls, not from foreign armies, but from the rot within. And today, the rot is staring us in the face. The silence that followed was suffocating. For the first time, Trump had no immediate retort, no rehearsed line, no thunderous applause to rescue him, just silence. And Jasmine's words, echoing, reverberating, refusing to fade. The tension was unbearable. Every person in that chamber knew the first provocation had landed. And while Trump had intended to crush his opponent with ridicule, it was Jasmine Crockett who had turned the insult into a blade, slicing open the facade of invincibility he had worn like armor for decades. The match had been lit, the storm was rising, and the nation was about to witness a battle unlike any it had ever seen. Trump's eyes glinted with the satisfaction of a predator who still believed he held the kill shot. He leaned back in his chair, then leaned forward, slowly, theatrically, hands clasped, smile curling into something more sinister. From beneath the desk, an aide rushed forward with a thick manila folder. Its edges were marked, its contents heavy. Trump snatched it up with a flourish, lifting it for the cameras to see, as though he were Moses holding the stone tablets. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, his voice booming with smug confidence, this is the end of Jasmine Crockett's little game. This, he shook the folder, papers rattling inside, is her downfall. The chamber gasped. Journalists surged forward, eyes wide, pens ready. Senators leaned across their benches. Viewers at home instinctively leaned closer to their screens. Trump stood, savoring the moment, and began pulling out sheets of paper. These documents, he declared, prove corruption, deception, and betrayal. They prove this so-called fighter for justice is nothing more than a fraud. He slammed the papers onto the desk before him, the crack echoing like a gavel. Here, he roared, bank records, secret meetings, foreign ties, evidence she has no business lecturing me or leading anything in this nation. Oh, what can I? He jabbed a finger toward Jasmine. This is the final chapter of your career. This, his voice sharpened like a blade, is the end of you. The words hung in the chamber like a death sentence. For a split second, silence swallowed the room. Then Jasmine Crockett smiled, not a nervous smile, not a shaky, uncertain twitch of the lips, a slow, knowing, devastating smile. She reached beneath her desk, and as though fate itself had prepared her hand, she pulled out her own folder, thinner, neater, its pages crisp and unmarked. She rose to her feet with the calm grace of a surgeon stepping into an operating theater. Mr. President, she began, her voice carrying with chilling clarity, you love to wave shadows and call them proof, but I've seen the light behind them. She raised the folder high, her eyes never leaving his. And this, she thundered, slamming it onto her desk with a crack that rivaled his own, is the truth you tried to bury. The chamber exploded. Reporters leapt to their feet. Photographers lunged forward, cameras flashing like lightning. Senators murmured in disbelief. Trump froze, his smirk vanishing as his eyes darted toward the folder she held. He knew, because the only way she could hold what she now held was if someone inside his own fortress had betrayed him. Jasmine flipped open the folder, her fingers precise, steady, as she revealed the first page for the cameras to catch. This, she said, her voice slicing through the air, is the original document. Not the doctored copy you hold in your hands, not the lies your team concocted in the shadows. The original, signed, sealed, and time-stamped. Long before your spin doctors ever touched it. Gasps swept the room. Trump's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, like a man drowning and desperate for air. Jasmine pressed on, her voice gathering strength, her words relentless. For every false claim you waved just now, I hold the real record. For every fabricated page you shoved before America, I hold the uncorrupted truth. She slammed another sheet onto her desk, then another, and another. Each thud was a hammer driving nails into his carefully constructed facade. Bank records? She sneered. Here are the originals, showing your hidden accounts, not mine. Foreign ties? She flipped another page. Yes, tied not to me, but to your own circle, the very men who bankroll your power. Secret meetings? She tossed a photo onto the pile, its black and white image burning under the lights. Meetings you attended, not me. The chamber trembled. Reporters shouted over one another. Cameramen stumbled to capture every angle. Viewers across America sat stunned, jaws slack, unable to comprehend what they were witnessing. Trump tried to speak, to shout, but the words snagged in his throat. His face flushed crimson, his hands gripping the folder he had once brandished like a weapon. Now it looked like nothing more than a shield of paper, flimsy and trembling. Jasmine pointed a finger at him, her eyes blazing with the fire of centuries of silenced voices now roaring through her. You wanted to show America my so-called downfall? Her voice rose, filling every corner of the chamber. Then let America see yours. The chamber erupted in chaos, some screaming, some clapping, some pounding fists on desks. It was no longer just debate. It was war. Trump staggered, trying to rally. But Jasmine's thunderous declaration had landed, and the cracks in his armor were spreading too fast to contain. For the first time in years, Donald J. Trump looked small, and Jasmine Crockett, with nothing but the truth in her hands, looked unstoppable. But Trump was not a man who surrendered easily. If he could not win with documents, he would strike with words. If he could not bury her with evidence, he would try to break her with humiliation. He rose suddenly, slamming both hands onto the desk so hard that the microphones rattled. The crack of wood against flesh ricocheted through the chamber, silencing the chaos for a split second. Then his voice thundered, raw and guttural. You think you've proven anything? You're nothing, Crockett. A nobody who got lucky. A failed lawyer. A cheap activist. A token in a seat you don't deserve. His words spilled like acid, burning the air around him. While I built towers, you were shouting in the streets. While I led this nation, you were whining about fairness. You're not a warrior for justice. You're a stain on it. Each sentence grew louder, harsher. The veins in his neck bulged. His fists pounded the desk again and again, like war drums echoing through marble walls. The chamber shook not with applause, but with tension, an atmosphere so heavy it pressed on the chest of every person present. He pointed at her, his finger trembling, not with fear, but with rage. You want to call me a liar? You want to lecture me? Look at you. Look at your record, your scandals, your failures. You're nothing but an angry mouth with no respect, no power, no history. Each word was meant to cut her down, to strip away her dignity in front of millions. But Jasmine did not move. She didn't flinch, didn't lift her voice, didn't even raise her hand to defend herself. Instead, she simply waited. Seconds passed. Trump's shouting filled the void, his voice cracking under the weight of his fury. He pounded the desk one last time and barked, "Answer me! If you dare, answer me!" The chamber froze. Jasmine slowly leaned forward, resting her palms on her desk. Her eyes locked onto his, unblinking. Her face calm, eerily calm, in the storm of his rage. And then, with the kind of composure that makes silence itself dangerous, she spoke. When the truth makes you tremble, all you have left is to scream. The words fell like ice water onto a raging fire. The chamber erupted. Gasps, murmurs, even applause rippled across the room. Some lawmakers banged their hands against their desks in disbelief at the audacity. Reporters scrambled, shouting into phones, their voices trembling with the thrill of history. Cameras zoomed so close that every twitch on Trump's face was magnified for the world to see. And for the first time in that brutal exchange, Donald Trump faltered. His mouth opened, but no sound came. His jaw clenched, his eyes narrowed. But the fury that had fueled him moments before sputtered into something weaker. A pause, a stammer, a hesitation. The man who had built his empire on insults and intimidation had just been silenced by a single sentence. Jasmine did not smile. She did not gloat. She simply sat back in her chair, her expression steady, her silence more powerful than any counterattack. Because she knew, Everyone knew that victory sometimes came not from shouting louder, but from letting the other man reveal his weakness. The chamber buzzed with energy, as though electricity itself coursed through its veins. Viewers at home gripped their armrests, their hearts pounding. Churchgoers whispered prayers. Veterans clenched their fists. Families argued and cheered and cried in their living rooms. The nation was spellbound, hooked not by spectacle, but by something far more dangerous: truth spoken without fear. Trump tried to regain control, straightening his tie, adjusting his papers, forcing a smirk back onto his lips. But the tremor in his hand betrayed him. He leaned toward the microphone, his voice dropping low, venomous. "You'll regret that," he hissed. But his threat landed flat, swallowed by the weight of her defiance. Because in that moment, it was clear to all. Jasmine Crockett had not just endured his assault, she had turned it against him. She had exposed him, not with documents, not with witnesses, but with something even deadlier: composure. And as the noise swelled again, as reporters screamed for statements and senators argued among themselves, one truth hung in the air, undeniable, unshakable. Donald J. Trump, the man who had broken nations with his words, had just been broken by hers. But Jasmine Crockett was not finished. Silence lingered for a few seconds, heavy and suffocating. Reporters leaned forward, senators froze mid-breath, and millions at home sat at the edge of their couches. Jasmine's voice cut through the air like a scalpel. "Mr. President," she said, measured and precise, "I have one question for you." Trump stiffened, his head tilting slightly, his eyes narrowing. Jasmine slid a single sheet of paper across her desk. Its surface gleamed under the chamber lights, a copy of one of Trump's most controversial executive orders. Her gaze never wavered. "Did you sign this order for America?" she asked, her words sharp enough to slice marble. "Or did you sign it for the pockets of your family?" The chamber detonated. Gasps tore through the air. Some shouted in disbelief. Others clapped. Others shook their heads violently as if struck by lightning. The cameras lunged forward, operators scrambling to catch every flicker on Trump's face. For the first time that day, the mask cracked wide open. His mouth twitched. His eyes darted. His fingers drummed nervously against the desk, betraying the panic rippling beneath his practiced composure. He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing coherent came out. This is ridiculous," he barked, his voice rising too quickly, too shrill. "A disgraceful, dishonest accusation." But his stammer, his frantic tone, his refusal to answer directly, it all screamed louder than any confession. Jasmine's silence after her question was surgical. She didn't interrupt. She didn't press further. She let the weight of her words hang in the air, like a blade suspended over his head, and the silence worked against him. Every second he failed to answer, the chamber's doubt thickened. Every stammer only magnified the suspicion. Reporters scribbled furiously, their headlines already writing themselves. "Trump dodges question on family profits." At home, the reaction was instant. Veterans in VFW halls muttered to each other. Grandmothers watching from quiet kitchens shook their heads. Old union workers whispered, "She got him. She's got him cornered." The public spark had been lit. Trump slammed his hand down again, desperate to claw back control. "This is an attack, a pathetic political stunt. My family has sacrificed more than anyone here, more than you, more than any of these weak so-called leaders." His words tumbled over each other, frantic and disjointed. But Jasmine raised her hand, calm as stone. "Answer the question." The chamber erupted again. Her demand was not shouted. It didn't need to be. It was the clarity, the authority, the sheer moral force behind her words that rattled him more than any insult. Trump pointed at her, his face flushed red. "You don't get to interrogate me. You don't get to demand answers from your president." Jasmine leaned forward, her voice lowering to a chilling calm. "I don't demand answers for me. I demand them for the American people. They trusted you. Did you betray them?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Trump's eyes flickered to his allies, searching for rescue, but none came. They shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unwilling to share his spotlight of shame. The cameras zoomed closer, catching the sweat glistening at his temple. It was an image that would replay across every news cycle that night. A president cornered, a liar exposed, a titan trembling before a single woman's truth. Finally, Trump snapped, "This is a witch hunt!" He bellowed, his fist slamming against the desk. "This is the same garbage they tried in 2016 and 2020 and every year after. And it never worked. It will never work because I—" He stopped himself, realizing too late that his tirade had veered off course. The chamber caught it. So did the cameras. So did Jasmine. Her lips curled into the faintest smile, the smile of a woman who knew she had drawn blood. Because the truth was clear to everyone watching, he had not answered the question. He could not answer the question. And in politics, silence is louder than guilt. Jasmine straightened her shoulders, her voice carrying one final blow. "America deserved your honesty, but all you've given us is your fear." The chamber exploded once more. Cheers, gasps, furious protests colliding in a cacophony of history unfolding live. Trump sank back into his chair, seething, trying to gather himself. But the damage had already been done. The spark had ignited. And once the public fire begins to burn, it cannot be contained. The chamber was already trembling with chaos when the sound of heavy doors creaking open sliced through the noise. Every head turned. From the shadows at the back of the chamber, a figure emerged, slow, deliberate, every step echoing on the polished floor. The light struck his face, and gasps rippled like shockwaves. It was not a stranger. It was a man who had once sat at Trump's right hand, his most trusted confidant, his fixer, his shield. A man who had drafted deals, carried secrets, whispered strategies into the president's ear. And now here he was, walking into the lion's den, not with deference, but with defiance. The chamber erupted. Reporters scrambled. Cameras swung. Senators shouted over one another. Trump's face drained of color. "Traitor," he hissed under his breath. The man did not flinch. He approached the center podium, his eyes locked on Jasmine Crockett. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who had lived too long in silence. "I swore loyalty once," he began, his tone steady but sharp. "Not to the truth, but to him. To protect his power, his image, his empire of lies." The chamber stilled. Even the restless shuffle of papers and the scratch of pens faded. He continued louder now. "But today I swear something different. I swear to tell this chamber and the American people the truth." The words cracked like thunder. Trump shot to his feet, slamming the desk so violently the microphone shrieked with feedback. "You swore loyalty to me," he bellowed, his voice raw, jagged with fury. "You owe me everything, and now you crawl in here like a rat? You think you can destroy me?" The witness turned, his eyes cold, unshaken. "I don't owe you," he said. "I owe them." He gestured to the cameras, to the millions watching across the country. "I owe America the truth you tried to bury." The chamber quaked with applause, with shouts, with gasps that collided like clashing cymbals. Trump's face twisted, red with rage. He pointed a trembling finger at the man who had once been his shield. "Betrayal!" he roared. "This is betrayal of the highest order." But Jasmine Crockett's voice sliced through his fury, calm and sharp as a blade. "The only betrayal here," she said, each syllable deliberate, merciless, "is the betrayal of the American people." The room thundered. Senators pounded their desks. Reporters shouted over one another. The sound of flash bulbs exploded like fireworks. And Trump? He faltered, his fury sputtering into a sputtering roar that no longer commanded fear, only desperation. The witness stepped closer to the microphone, unshaken by the storm. "For years I defended him," he said. "I lied for him. I signed the papers. I silenced the voices. I buried the evidence. But I can't carry that weight anymore. Not while this country bleeds from his corruption." He held up a document, the edges trembling only slightly in his hands. "This is proof," he declared, "that orders were signed not for America, but for profit, for power, for his family, for himself. This is proof of betrayal." The chamber gasped again, a collective exhale of disbelief and revelation. Trump lunged forward, shouting, his words incoherent, swallowed by the roar of the crowd. But Jasmine Crockett's gaze never left the witness. Her voice carried steady, unwavering. "Let the record show," she said, "that even those who once protected him now see the truth, and truth cannot be silenced." The chamber erupted once more, the sound almost deafening, as though the walls themselves were shaking under the weight of history. Trump stood frozen, fists clenched, chest heaving, eyes wild. For the first time, his power felt brittle. For the first time, his empire of fear looked like it was collapsing before his eyes. And Jasmine Crockett, calm, resolute, unyielding, looked not just like his opponent, but like his reckoning. The witness placed the document on the desk, a final gesture of defiance. "This," he said, his voice ringing clear, "is my testimony. Let the people see who he really is." And with that, the chamber fell into a silence so thick it felt holy. Because everyone knew something irreversible had just been set in motion. The storm was no longer rising. The storm had arrived, and at its eye stood Jasmine Crockett. She didn't need papers or folders or whispered testimonies anymore. She needed only her voice. Before millions watching live, before senators frozen in shock, before cameras desperate to catch every flicker of the moment, she turned and pointed directly at Donald J. Trump. Her finger was steady. Her tone was lethal. "You are not a victim," she declared, her words ringing out like church bells in the silence. "You are the man who turned America into a stage for your lies." The chamber erupted. Gasps split the air. Reporters cried out. Senators whispered frantically, some covering their mouths, others gripping the edges of their desks as though to anchor themselves against the weight of her words. Trump shot up from his chair so violently it nearly toppled backward. His face flamed red, his jaw clenched, his fists balled so tightly his knuckles blanched. "How dare you?" he bellowed, his voice shaking the rafters. "How dare you speak to me that way? I gave this country strength. I gave it power. I gave it victory." But the desperation in his tone betrayed him. It was not the roar of an untouchable titan. It was the howl of a cornered beast. Jasmine didn't flinch. Her gaze never wavered, her eyes blazing with the fury of every citizen who had ever been silenced, dismissed, or betrayed. "You gave it division," she shot back. "You gave it chaos. You gave it shame." The words landed like hammer blows. Trump's mouth opened, then snapped shut. He turned wildly toward his allies, searching for some flicker of support, but found only downcast eyes and stiffened jaws. Even his staunchest defenders knew the tide had turned, and Jasmine pressed harder. "You've called yourself a savior," she said, her voice slicing cleanly through his bluster. "But saviors don't cage children. Saviors don't sell policies like products. Saviors don't bleed a nation dry to feed their own greed." The chamber shook with murmurs, with disbelief, with fury and awe colliding in every corner. Millions watching at home leaned forward, mouths agape, hearts pounding. Because this wasn't just a debate anymore. It was a trial. And Jasmine Crockett was both the prosecutor and the executioner. Trump slammed his fist down on the desk, his voice cracking with rage. "Lies, all lies! You're a fraud, a disgrace, a nobody. You'll regret this for the rest of your life." Sanum, but the tremor in his voice gave him away. The man who had once broken nations with insults was unraveling under hers. Jasmine's response was a whisper, yet somehow it carried louder than his roar. "History will not remember your rage. It will remember your deceit." The silence that followed was unbearable. Reporters stopped typing. Cameras zoomed tighter. Even the shuffle of shoes, the coughs of senators, the usual background hum of the chamber vanished into nothing. It was as if the entire nation was holding its breath, waiting for the final strike. Trump lunged forward, pointing at her, his voice hoarse. "You think you've beaten me? You think one speech erases my power? I am the President of the United States. I am invincible." But Jasmine only straightened her shoulders, her presence radiating something far greater than invincibility. "Truth. You are not invincible," she said, her words like iron. "You are exposed. And the louder you shout, the clearer it becomes that you are afraid." Gasps thundered again, a tidal wave of shock and awe crashing through the chamber. On television screens across America, millions sat stunned. Retired workers whispered, "She's tearing him apart." Veterans muttered, "That's the fight we've been waiting for." Grandparents, pastors, community leaders, all watching, saw the mask slip, saw the giant stagger, saw the empire tremble. Trump collapsed back into his chair, seething, his chest heaving as though every breath was a battle. His eyes darted, searching, desperate for some weapon, some line, some savior's applause. But there was none. The chamber had already chosen its victor. Jasmine Crockett stood tall, her chin lifted, her voice steady, her presence undeniable. And in that moment, before millions, she delivered the blow that shattered the illusion once and for all. "You are not America's future. You are its warning." The words struck like lightning. The chamber exploded into chaos. Cheers, shouts, frantic typing, flash bulbs bursting like fireworks. And Trump, once the man who commanded every room he entered, sat diminished, trembling under the weight of a truth too sharp to escape. The verbal death blow had been struck, and the storm showed no signs of ending. Trump erupted like a volcano refusing to die. He lurched forward, gripping the edge of his desk with white-knuckled fists, his voice erupting in guttural roars that shook the microphones. "You will not humiliate me," he bellowed. "You will not turn this chamber into your circus. I am the one who commands this nation. Me, not some rookie congresswoman who doesn't know her place." The chamber quaked with the force of his fury. Chairs scraped against marble as senators rose to their feet, some shouting in defense, others in outrage. The air filled with chaos, yells, boos, applause, and the snapping of camera shutters like thunder rolling overhead. But Jasmine Crockett did not flinch. She stood tall in the storm, her voice cutting through his like a blade slicing through fog. "You call this a circus?" she snapped, her tone sharp, precise. "You made it one. You dragged this nation's dignity into the mud for your ego, your greed, your power." Her words lashed against him, striking with the rhythm of a drum beat. Trump roared again, pointing a shaking finger at her. "You know nothing of power, nothing of leadership. You've never built a tower, never run an empire, never stood on a stage with the world at your feet. You are nothing but a fraud, an actress reading lines she doesn't understand." The chamber erupted again, a clash of voices rising higher, louder, hotter. But Jasmine met his fury with fire of her own, fire cold, controlled, merciless. "Leadership," she retorted, her eyes blazing. "Leadership is not building towers of gold while families crumble. Leadership is not selling the nation's future for your children's fortune. Leadership is not standing on the world stage and turning America into a joke." Each word drew gasps, shouts, applause. The chamber was no longer a place of governance. It was a battlefield, every sentence a weapon, every silence a tactic. Trump pounded the desk again, his voice cracking as he tried to regain dominance. "You think the people are with you? They love me. They always have. I filled stadiums. Stadiums, do you hear me? You can't fill a corner cafe with your supporters." His words came out desperate, frantic, drowning in their own echo. Jasmine struck back instantly, her voice never rising but hitting harder than his shouts. "You filled stadiums with anger. I fill hearts with hope, and hope lasts longer than rage." The chamber gasped. Senators clutched their chests, reporters dropped their pens. The words rippled across the nation like an electric current. On living room couches, people leaned forward, goosebumps prickling their skin. The clash had become more than argument. It was spectacle. It was history. Trump roared again, his voice ragged now, his body trembling with the effort of his rage. "You dare speak of hope? You, who clawed your way into politics on pity? You who hide behind lies and fake morality? You are nothing but a weak woman pretending to be strong." But Jasmine's reply was instant, surgical, devastating. "And yet here you are, screaming, trembling, unraveling, because of this so-called weak woman." The chamber exploded into chaos, a cacophony of cheers, boos, gas, and shouts colliding like waves against stone. Trump's face twisted, his fist slamming the desk one more time, but the impact no longer echoed as it once had. The chamber's energy had shifted. The momentum belonged to Jasmine. Her voice remained calm, slicing through the noise with the precision of a scalpel. You say I don't know my place. My place is here, standing against you. My place is with the people you betrayed. My place is to remind America that no man, not even a president, is above the truth. Every word struck like a hammer against the brittle walls of his authority. Trump opened his mouth to retort, but the roar of the chamber drowned him out. Senators shouted, reporters screamed into microphones, millions at home cheered, cried, or cursed at their screens. The noise was deafening, unstoppable, uncontainable. And yet within that storm, Jasmine Crockett's voice rose steady, unbroken, unyielding. She did not just counter him. She dismantled him, word by word, strike by strike. The chamber had become a war zone of language, fury, and truth. But the outcome was already tilting. The giant roared. The storm raged. And still the balance leaned, undeniably, irrevocably, toward Jasmine Crockett. Then the chamber door creaked again. The witness, the same former confidant who had entered earlier, rose from his seat, his face pale but resolute. He held a single sheet of paper in his hand, trembling only from the weight of what it contained. Enough, he said, his voice cutting through the chaos like a gunshot. The chamber fell silent almost instantly. Every shout, every protest, every chant died at once. All that remained was the hum of cameras, the whir of lenses focusing in. He lifted the paper, his hand steadying as conviction overtook fear. This, he declared, is proof that one of President Trump's executive orders was drafted not by public servants, not by elected officials, but by his own son in a private office, for the sole purpose of funneling taxpayer money into family businesses. The chamber froze. The weight of his words landed like a missile. For a heartbeat there was nothing. No coughs, no whispers, no shifting of chairs, only silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. And then, click, 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 click. The sound of camera shutters erupted, rapid fire, like machine guns unloading. Reporters scrambled to capture every frame of Trump's face. He wasn't smirking now. His mouth hung open, lips parted but voiceless. His eyes blinked rapidly, darting from the witness to Jasmine, then to the cameras, then back to the paper in that trembling hand. For the first time, Donald J. Trump looked like a man with no script. Jasmine rose slowly, her gaze fixed on him, her presence filling the chamber like thunder clouds gathering before a strike. You signed it, she said, her voice steady, unyielding. Knowing it was not written by public servants, knowing it was designed not for the people, but for your family. Trump's lips moved, but no words came. A man who had never lost his tongue, never lost his bluster, stood mute before millions. Senators exchanged stunned glances, some covering their mouths, others scribbling frantic notes. The silence grew unbearable, and yet no one dared to break it, because in that moment, the most powerful man in the country had been stripped of the one weapon he had always wielded without hesitation, his voice. The witness spoke again, firmer now, emboldened by Trump's paralysis. I was there, he said. I saw the draft. I saw who signed it. I watched him approve it, smiling, knowing full well what it meant. And I stayed silent too long. Not anymore. The chamber gasped again, a collective exhale of shock and revelation. Cameras zoomed tighter on Trump's face. His jaw trembled. His eyes widened. Still no words. Jasmine took a single step forward, her tone like iron. The only smile America will remember, she said, is the one you wore while you robbed them. The silence broke. The chamber exploded into chaos. Reporters screaming questions, senators shouting accusations, aides running frantically between rows, the cacophony deafening. But Trump did not move. He sat frozen, his hands gripping the desk, his knuckles white, his body rigid. The cameras devoured his stillness, his shock, his unraveling. And across America, millions of viewers sat in awe. Some whispered, "It's over." Others gasped, "He's finished." Even those who once defended him struggled to find excuses in the face of his silence. Because silence is louder than denial. Silence is louder than defiance. And in that moment, Donald Trump's silence was deafening. Jasmine's gaze lingered on him, unwavering. She didn't shout. She didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Her truth had landed. The witness's testimony had detonated. And the President of the United States sat mute, shattered under the weight of his own exposed deceit. The storm had not just arrived, it had struck. And the nation, watching breathlessly, knew this was only the beginning of the unraveling. Outside the chamber, the world was already on fire. News tickers across every major network lit up in blazing red banners. Breaking, bombshell, testimony links, Trump to family profiteering. Anchors struggled to keep up with the torrent of revelations, their voices cracking with urgency as they replayed the moment Jasmine Crockett pointed straight at the President of the United States and called him a liar to his face. On social media, hashtags detonated like fireworks. Hashtag Trump exposed. Hashtag Crockett vs. Trump. Justice strikes. Within minutes, they trended worldwide. Millions of Americans shared clips of Trump's silence. The unthinkable, the image of a man once so loud now rendered speechless. Some looped Jasmine's words into rallying cries. You are not a victim. You are America's warning. In homes across the country, television volume was turned up higher. Radios blared in kitchens. Phones buzzed with alerts. The nation was transfixed, locked into the drama unfolding in real time. Inside the chamber, the air was different now. Every eye turned toward Jasmine Crockett. She was no longer just a congresswoman, no longer just a participant in a political spectacle. She was history unfolding, live before a fractured nation. Her posture was steady, her expression calm, her gaze fixed forward. And Trump, once a figure who dominated every room, every stage, every screen, stumbled under the weight of the moment. He adjusted his tie, smoothed his papers, tried to reclaim the aura of power that had carried him through scandal after scandal. But it wasn't working. His hands trembled. His breathing was uneven, and the cameras caught everything. "Mr. President," a reporter shouted from the press gallery, his voice cracking with excitement. "How do you respond to the allegation your family profited from this executive order?" Trump raised his chin, forcing a smirk, but his voice betrayed him. "This is nonsense," he said, too quickly, too thinly. "Fake news, the same garbage they've thrown at me for years. It's pathetic." But even as he spoke, his words were drowned out, not by Jasmine this time, but by the rising swell of voices outside the chamber. Through the thick glass, faint chants could be heard. Crowds were gathering on the steps of the Capitol, their voices echoing up into the sky. "Justice for the people! Justice for the people!" The sound grew louder by the minute, amplified by bullhorns, carried live on every network. Inside, Jasmine rose again, her voice calm, deliberate, unshaken. "America is not watching a performance," she said. "America is witnessing the truth, and the truth does not need to shout. It only needs to stand." The words rolled through the chamber, quieting the chaos, drawing every eye back to her. Trump's lips parted, ready to counter, but no words came. His silence was louder than her voice, and the world was listening. Networks replayed the moment instantly, over and over. Jasmine standing tall, Trump wavering, the chamber in stunned silence. On Twitter, the clip was shared millions of times within an hour. On Facebook, live-stream comment sections overflowed with reactions. "She destroyed him. This is history. I never thought I'd see Trump silenced." Even on networks that once defended him, anchors hesitated, their tones uncertain, their words cautious. The narrative was shifting, the giant was wobbling, and Jasmine Crockett was holding the ground beneath his feet. Trump tried again to stand, to project authority, but his knees seemed unsteady, his movements awkward. He forced a laugh, shaking his head. "Ridiculous," he muttered, more to himself than to the nation. But the cameras caught the hollowness. Jasmine didn't even need to respond. Her silence was a mirror, reflecting his weakness back at him. And the media devoured it. Headlines flashed, "Trump falters under Crockett's assault." The moment the president lost his grip, Crockett emerges as voice of justice. The firestorm was beyond containment now. In bars, in churches, in schools, in quiet nursing homes, people debated, shouted, argued, wept. But no one turned away, because this wasn't just politics anymore. It was a reckoning. And at its center was a woman with unshakable resolve, facing down the most powerful man in the world and making him look small. Trump sat back down, his smirk gone, his posture slouched, his aura dimmed. The cameras zoomed in, unrelenting, and for the first time, the man who once controlled the narrative was no longer writing it. Jasmine Crockett was. Trump could feel it, the ground slipping beneath him, the control he once commanded dissolving before millions of eyes. And so he did what he had always done when cornered. He roared. He lurched to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the marble floor, the sound shrieking like steel on steel. His hands slammed the desk, rattling the microphones, his voice exploding through the chamber with raw, uncontrolled rage. "You people are all corrupt," he screamed. "This is a disgrace. A disgrace. You treat me like a criminal when I am the President of the United States. I built this country back from nothing. And you," he jabbed a finger at Jasmine, his voice cracking, "you are nothing but a fraud standing on lies." The chamber shook with his fury. Senators shouted, aides scrambled, reporters nearly toppled over one another as they captured every second of his meltdown. He pounded the desk again, spit flying, his face crimson, his chest heaving. "You will not destroy me. You will not lecture me. I am untouchable. I am invincible. I am—" But the words broke apart, swallowed by his own hoarse throat. The once commanding voice of Donald J. Trump now sounded ragged, desperate, frayed at the edges. And Jasmine Crockett, silent through his tirade, rose slowly from her seat. Her presence cut through the chaos like a blade of light. She did not shout. She did not match his volume. She didn't need to. When she spoke, her voice was calm, cold, and merciless. "Quit your BS." The chamber froze. Even the cameras seemed to pause, their whirring halting in stunned anticipation. Her words sliced the air clean, crisp, undeniable. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on his, every syllable a hammer blow. "This is the United States Congress, not your casino." The words detonated. It was as if thunder had struck the heart of Washington. The chamber erupted, not with chaos this time, but with unity, with a wave of sound so deafening it shook the very rafters. Senators leapt to their feet. Some clapped, some shouted, some simply stood in stunned awe. Reporters scrambled to capture the moment, their voices rising over one another as they screamed into phones. "She said it! She actually said it!" Flashbulbs exploded in rapid fire, a storm of light capturing history in the making. And across America, in bars, in living rooms, in quiet kitchens, people gasped, cheered, even wept. Because Jasmine Crockett had just said what millions had wanted to scream for years. Trump's face collapsed into shock, his mouth falling open, his eyes wide, his posture sagging as though struck by a physical blow. The fury drained from him. The roar that had once cowed nations faltered into silence. He tried to laugh, to sneer, to dismiss her with the wave of his hand. But no sound came, because there was no counter to truth delivered so cleanly, so ruthlessly. Jasmine stood, unflinching, her figure illuminated under the blazing lights, her voice still resonating in the air, like the lingering roll of thunder after lightning. And in that moment, she was not just a congresswoman. She was justice personified. The chamber had risen to its feet, the roar of applause and disbelief colliding in a frenzy of sound. But Jasmine did not raise her hands in victory, nor did she bask in the ovation. Her eyes stayed fixed on him, the man who had once believed himself untouchable, now trembling under the weight of her words. For the first time in decades of spectacle and swagger, Donald J. Trump looked not like a president, not like a titan, not even like a fighter. He looked defeated, and Jasmine Crockett had needed only one sentence to bring him to his knees. The chamber's roar carried on, unstoppable, uncontainable, echoing out into the streets where crowds had gathered, their chants now deafening. "Justice! Justice! Justice!" The storm inside had become a storm outside, and America itself seemed to thunder with the force of it. Jasmine Crockett stood still, steady, the eye of the hurricane. And Trump, his chest heaving, his face pale beneath the crimson flush, his words gone, was swallowed by the storm he could no longer control. Then suddenly he snapped. With a violent jerk of his arm, he shoved his chair backward, its legs screeching across the marble floor. The chamber gasped as he staggered to his feet, his face twisted in fury, his hands trembling with helpless rage. "I don't need this," he roared, though his voice cracked like splintering glass. "I don't need to stand here and listen to this insult to the presidency." He gathered the scattered papers on his desk, clutching them with shaking fists. Aides rushed forward, whispering frantically, but he brushed them off with a snarl. "I am the President of the United States," he shouted again, louder this time, as though repeating it might make the words true. "I will not be humiliated." But humiliation was already written across his face, etched into every trembling movement, captured in every flash of the cameras. The world was watching as Donald J. Trump, the man who once bent headlines to his will, now stumbled in retreat before the storm he could not silence. He turned, his coat flaring, his steps uneven as he stormed toward the chamber doors. The sound of his heels echoed, sharp, hollow, final. And in that moment, the cameras devoured him. His back hunched, his figure diminished, his shadow shrinking under the blinding lights. The image would replay 1,000 times before the night was over. The President of the United States walking away, defeated. The doors slammed shut behind him, and in the sudden silence that followed, all eyes shifted back to Jasmine Crockett. She had not moved. She stood at her desk, bathed in the harsh glow of the overhead lights, her eyes steady, her shoulders unyielding. The chaos of the chamber, the shouting, the thunderous applause, it all seemed to orbit around her now, as though she were the center of gravity itself. Reporters shouted her name. Cameras zoomed close, their lenses trembling with the electricity of the moment. And in that light, in that silence between roars, Jasmine Crockett stood not just as a congresswoman, not just as an opponent, but as something larger, a symbol, a fighter, a warrior of justice. Whispers rippled through the chamber, growing louder with each passing second until they became chants, unstoppable, echoing off marble and wood. "Justice! Justice! Justice!" The word carried beyond the chamber walls, spilling into the streets where thousands had gathered, their voices rising in unison, a chorus that shook the very foundation of the Capitol. Social media exploded. Clips of Jasmine's final strike against Trump flooded every platform. Headlines screamed, "The day Trump fell," "Crockett's thunder," "History in the chamber." And in homes across America, people leaned back in awe, whispering to themselves that they had just witnessed something far greater than politics. This was history. Jasmine Crockett lifted her chin, her gaze sweeping across the chamber, across the cameras, across the weight of a nation pressing down on her shoulders. She did not smile. This was not victory to celebrate. It was a burden, a duty, a responsibility that stretched beyond her own name. Her voice when she finally spoke was calm, steady, resonant. Today was not about me. Today was about truth, about reminding America that power without justice is nothing but corruption in disguise. The chamber fell silent, every word seared into memory. She continued, her eyes burning with conviction. "We are not here to serve ourselves. We are here to serve the people, and the people will no longer be silenced." Applause thundered, filling every corner, every inch of the chamber, rolling out into the streets, across the airwaves, through the veins of a shaken nation, and Jasmine Crockett stood in the center of it all, unshaken, unyielding, a beacon against the storm. For Donald Trump, the day would be remembered as the collapse of an empire of bluster and deceit. For Jasmine Crockett, it would be remembered as the day she stepped fully into history, not just as a challenger, not just as a congresswoman, but as the warrior of justice. The curtain had fallen, but the echo of her voice, the thunder of her truth, would carry long after the lights dimmed, long after the chants faded, long after the chamber emptied. Because this was not just the end of a confrontation, It was the beginning of a new chapter for America, and history would remember it forever. In the end, the clash between Jasmine Crockett and Donald Trump was more than a battle of words. It was a reminder that truth, no matter how fragile it seems, can outlast the loudest lies. Power may roar, deceive, and intimidate, but it crumbles when confronted by courage rooted in integrity. And perhaps that is the lesson for us all, that justice is not born from noise or dominance, but from the quiet, unyielding strength to stand for what is right, even when the storm rages loudest. If this story shook you, don't just move on. Pause, share it, talk about it. Send it to someone who still believes justice has a voice stronger than any throne. Subscribe to Harrison Stories, where truth is never silenced and every lie meets its reckoning. Hit the bell, because the next chapter isn't polished, it's fire, and it may just change how you see power. This story is a fictional dramatization, inspired by real injustices and real courage. Any resemblance to actual people or events is symbolic, created for reflection, awareness, and the fight for something better. Thank you for watching. Justice doesn't wait to be given. It rises when people demand it. This is Harrison Stories.